Welcome back to RealFear Files. Before we dive in, I want to wish each of you a very happy Halloween. Tonight, we've prepared a spine-chilling special. A collection of 9 terrifying tales of the scariest encounters that have ever happened on Halloween. For the full effect, dim your lights, get cozy, and let yourself drift into the shadows with us. Now, let's step into the darkness. Story 1. The House in the Hollow. I had just wrapped up some repairs on my late uncle's old home. A crooked, eccentric place buried deep in a hollow outside Maple Ridge. The closest neighbor was probably a couple of miles away, but you'd never spot them unless you squinted hard at a thin wisp of chimney smoke. When I first arrived, the house didn't seem like much, but I loved having a project to tinker with.
Halloween that year fell on a Thursday, and I remember that because it was my first one alone. No plans, no trick-or-treaters. Out here, the isolation was total. No decorations, just me, a small fire, and a leftover pumpkin ale I discovered in the fridge. I intended to relax and maybe watch something mindless on my laptop before bed. Around 9 p.m., I thought I heard a knock. It was a sharp, singular tap coming from the back wall near the bedroom. I froze and listened, but it didn't repeat. I let out a half-laugh, half-sigh and convinced myself it was nothing. Old wood settling or wind making a beam pop. Normal stuff. Still, I got up to check. The back door was locked. I jiggled the handle and peeked through the small window. Nothing but the slope behind the house, scattered with wet leaves and tall weeds. Instinctively, I opened the door. Nobody was there. I went back inside, popped open another beer, and tried to dismiss the unease crawling up my spine. Probably just a squirrel, maybe a branch falling. Then, the knocking returned. This time, 3 distinct taps, from the front door. My body stiffened. I stared at the door, convinced it might knock again if I blinked. Through the peephole, the porch was empty. The gravel driveway stretched into the moonlight, completely still. No breeze, no moving trees, nothing. Cautiously, I stepped outside, shining my phone's flashlight across the porch. Again, nothing. But then, the rocking chair creaked. A single low groan, like someone had just risen from it. I hadn't touched it all day. Rain had fallen that morning, but the chair was dry, perfectly so. I froze, breathing hard, and carefully returned inside. I locked every lock, deadbolts, latches, even the old wooden wedge on the back door. Whatever had knocked, I wasn't welcoming it in. An hour passed. I was beginning to calm down when the power cut out suddenly. No flicker, no warning. Just a pitch-black silence that felt like the house itself had sucked the air from my lungs. Even the fridge hum had vanished. I lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table. Fear hadn't hit me yet, just alertness. Then I heard footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate, crossing from one side of the house to the other. Not branches. Not animals. Someone was walking above me. After maybe 10 minutes, they stopped. Not jumping off, just stopped. My unease grew. This was no ordinary quiet. I stayed put until my candle burned halfway down, trying not to make a sound. Then a whisper reached me. Not words, just breath slipping through the gap under the front door, accompanied by a soft, dragging noise like fingernails scraping the porch. I reached for my flashlight. It clicked and died. I smacked it. Nothing. Then the candle blew out.
I held my breath until it hurt, straining my eyes, but the darkness refused to yield. Then, a metallic scrape came from the side of the house near the cellar doors. I remembered locking them that morning, padlocked and chained. I didn't check. I couldn't. I stayed inside, still as stone, the night stretching on, every small sound jabbing into my nerves. Sleep was impossible. Morning finally came. Power returned as if nothing had happened. The lights flickered on, the fridge hummed. I stepped outside cautiously. The rocking chair had turned to face the woods. The cellar doors were cracked open. Heart pounding, I grabbed a hammer and my phone, finally showing a signal, and descended the cellar steps. Everything appeared normal until I noticed footprints. Barefoot, muddy, fresh. Too large for a child, too small for me. They ended abruptly at the far wall. I called the county sheriff and explained everything. The deputy listened, polite but skeptical. He suggested local kids might have played a prank. I asked how anyone could reach this remote spot without a car or cell reception. He shrugged. "It happens," he said. That night, I reinforced the cellar doors with real nails, double-checked all windows, and stayed by the kitchen table with a candle. At exactly 9 p.m., a single knock came from the back wall. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I waited until morning. By daylight, the cellar doors remained shut, but something had scratched along the edges, long, uneven lines like nails, not quite human. I stayed 3 more nights. On the 4th morning, I packed my truck and left everything I couldn't carry: furniture, tools, even the rocking chair. I drove straight back to Maryland, not stopping once. I still own the house, but I haven't returned since. My girlfriend at the time had gone away for a long Halloween weekend, heading up to Vermont to spend time with her family. I had stayed behind, partly because of work, but also because I had agreed to keep an eye on our grandparents' house while they were away. Their home was tucked into a quiet little mountain town called Elbridge, wedged deep into the lower ridges of the Appalachians. From the moment I arrived, I noticed how unnervingly still everything felt, as though the town itself had paused. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move, the trees frozen mid-sway. I hadn't planned anything fancy for Halloween. Just some chili cooking on the stove, a few beers to sip on, and maybe a couple of old, predictable horror movies on TV. Na had already warned me that there wouldn't be any trick-or-treaters. The roads were remote, twisting and narrow, and the town itself was tiny. Still, her grandparents had made a small effort to decorate the house before leaving. A patchwork scarecrow slumped on the porch swing, a few strands of fake cobwebs draped over the railings, and an old rusted sign by the mailbox reading, "Cider, Welcome," in large crooked letters. The scarecrow always caught my eye. It didn't look like anything store-bought. Too tall, with stiff wooden limbs, and a head that had clearly been stitched together by hand. Thick, uneven thread crisscrossed the fabric of its face, giving it a grotesque, almost human quality. It sat slumped on the swing, staring toward the gravel driveway like some silent, watchful guardian. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that it was the kind of decoration that would haunt you if you left it in the shadows for too long. Around 6 in the evening, I started cooking the chili. The warmth from the stove, the smell of simmering beans and spices, and the glow from the fire made the house feel almost cozy. I was just beginning to relax when I heard it. 3 knocks. Sharp, deliberate. Not a bell, not a tap from the wind. Knuckles against wood. I froze mid-step, hands still on the stove dial, the chili bubbling quietly behind me. No one ever just stopped by out here. You had to know the roads, navigate the winding mountain lanes, and make a real effort just to reach the driveway.
I walked to the front door slowly, heart pounding. My hand hovered over the knob, but I forced myself to peek outside. The porch was empty. The scarecrow hadn't moved, still slumped on the swing, though it now seemed to stare at me more intentionally, as if judging my hesitation. I glanced at the steps. No footprints, no parcels, nothing. The trees surrounding the house were still, the last hints of orange twilight fading behind the hills. A faint breeze nudged the swing, making it creak softly. But there was nothing else, no animals, no wind, no other movement. I stood there for longer than necessary, just listening. Eventually, I turned back inside and tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the house had settled, old wood shifting in the cooling evening air. I even laughed quietly to myself, shaking my head. I knew the kind of stories people told about places like this, and I wasn't about to become part of one. Then it happened again. 3 knocks. This time from the back. My blood ran cold. The narrow mudroom at the back of the house led out to a covered carport, and I had locked that door for sure. My stomach churned as I walked through the kitchen, grabbed the fire poker from the fireplace, and edged the door open. Nothing. The trees behind the house seemed thicker now, their shadows merging into an almost solid wall of darkness. The bird feeder by the gutter swung lazily, creaking just slightly. But there was no wind. No footprints on the cement. No animals rustling in the undergrowth. Only the same unnatural, expectant stillness that had been growing heavier in the air. I shut the door, double-checked the locks, and even tested the windows. Every precaution felt futile. I pulled out my phone and texted Na, asking if there was any chance a neighbor was playing a prank, or if someone in town liked to scare people. No response. I sank into the couch, poker at my side, phone in hand, staring blankly at the flickering TV. I wasn't watching, really. I was listening, straining my ears against the quiet. Then again, 3 knocks. 3 deliberate knocks. Left side of the house. There was no door there, just a wall, a few narrow windows, and bushes brushing the siding. I froze, heart thudding. I didn't move, couldn't move. I sat there, barely breathing, a sinking dread curling in my stomach. I didn't know what I expected, just that whatever was happening, it was intentional. Then the power went out. Everything died at once. TV, lights, fridge, even the hum of the house vanished. Not a flicker. Not a momentary blip. The microwave's digital clock went dark. Absolute silence fell. I gripped my flashlight, my pulse in my ears, and stared at the front door. Moonlight spilled faintly through the stained glass panel above it, and I thought I saw the scarecrow. It was standing, upright. Before, it had been slumped on the swing, an inert decoration. Now, it was in front of the door, arms pressed flat against the glass, as though peering inside. I didn't breathe. I slowly backed into the kitchen and flicked the flashlight on. I didn't pull back the curtain, just aimed the beam toward the porch. Empty. Nothing stirred. Then came the footsteps above me. Slow, heavy, measured. The floorboards groaned under the weight, moving across the upstairs with a deliberate rhythm that sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't gone upstairs yet. Na had told me the bedroom there was rarely used and drafty. Now I had no choice. I crept up the stairs, one creaking board at a time, flashlight in one hand, poker in the other. The attic door was shut, It had been open when I arrived, now crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open slowly. The window was wide, letting cold air sweep in, curtains billowing like sails. One quilt lay half pulled down on the bed, as if someone had been sitting there, but the room was empty. Except for the boots in the corner. Muddy, heavy, pointing outward, like someone had just stepped out. I didn't touch them, didn't get close. I backed out carefully, shut the door, and locked it.
Downstairs again, I tried calling Na. Still no answer. For a while, everything remained calm. The candles flickered, casting long shadows that made the room feel smaller, tighter, almost suffocating. The house groaned as if settling, and I even started to convince myself I had overreacted. Then the landline rang. The old off-white phone with a spiral cord by the pantry. 3 sharp rings. I froze. I picked it up, breathing. Not static. Low, steady, deliberate breathing, close to the receiver. Then click. Silence. I grabbed my coat, keys, and bolted to the front door. The scarecrow was back on the swing, but it had changed. Arms crossed over its chest. Head turned, staring directly at the door. Muddy footprints climbed the steps, but none descended. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the car, started it, and drove straight into town. Not stopping until I reached a strip mall, heart hammering, unable to shake the feeling that it had followed me all the way from the porch. Even now, thinking back, I don't know if I imagined parts of that night. But the footprints, the breathing on the landline, and the movements of that scarecrow, those were real. Too real. I never went back to that house after that Halloween, and I never want to. Halloween that year landed on a Tuesday, and I was looking after my aunt's house, tucked away in the small Appalachian town of Draycott. Her home perched on the outskirts, high up in the hills, surrounded by thick trees that swallowed most of the evening light. She had traveled to Tennessee for a week-long Bible conference and asked me to stay behind, mainly to feed her 2 dogs, Margot and Skip, and make sure the house didn't fall into disrepair. I didn't have many plans, so I agreed. It sounded quiet, maybe even restful. The first few nights were almost eerily calm. I would wake with the soft rustle of the dogs stretching, feed them, and then pass time with a few old movies while scrolling through my phone until the signal faded, which it always did out here. I eventually drifted off to sleep, lulled by the persistent chirping of cicadas and the occasional creak of the old house settling. I wasn't expecting any trick-or-treaters. Up here, deep in the woods, few people even knew the town existed. Still, I picked up a small bag of candy from the gas station in town. Tradition felt important, even if pointless. Halloween night arrived. Around 6, I fed Margot and Skip. Margot, the older dog, curled up on the couch in her usual spot, eyes half-lidded and calm. Skip stretched near the front door, his long body resting like a living rug. I flicked on the porch light and poured the candy into a bowl, placing it on the railing outside. I didn't really expect anyone to hike all the way up, but it felt right. Dinner was a microwaved lasagna tray, uninspired but filling, and I settled in with an old slasher film. The night rolled by slowly, almost lazily. By 9, I was dozing in the recliner, belly full, drifting just on the edge of sleep. The creaks in the house felt almost purposeful, timed with the ominous beats of the movie.
Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't the sound itself that startled me. It was how loud and sudden it seemed in the thick quiet. I sat upright fast. Oddly, the dogs didn't react. No bark, no tilt of the head, no pricked ears. Just dead silence, as if they couldn't hear it, or didn't want to. That bell was the old kind you really had to press hard to get it to chime. It hadn't gone off a single time since I'd been here. I waited a few moments. Nothing else. No footsteps, no voices. Maybe a late trick-or-treater had already run off, I told myself. I got up and approached the front door. Its stained glass panel, a mosaic of warped yellows and reds, looked beautiful during the day but was all but useless at night. I cracked the door open. Nobody there. The candy bowl was untouched. The gravel path to the driveway lay empty. Beyond that, the woods were still. Not even a hint of wind rustling the trees. I was just about to retreat inside when the porch light flickered once, sharp and quick, like an eye blinking, then stabilized. Feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, I stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line. Nothing stirred. The quiet seemed almost unnatural, thickening around me like a curtain. I returned indoors. That's when I noticed the dogs. Both were now standing, alert and tense. They weren't looking at me, nor at the door. Their gaze was fixed toward the kitchen, bodies rigid, ears perked. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I followed their stare. The back door was wide open. I froze. I hadn't touched that door. I had specifically bolted it, knowing the latch was sticky and tricky to secure. It couldn't have swung open by itself. I walked over and shut it, ensuring it caught properly this time, then locked it firmly. The dogs didn't move. They stayed in place, eyes glued to the same spot. I started inspecting the other doors and windows. Kitchen, living room, upstairs, all secure. Side door, locked. No broken latches, no muddy footprints, no sign of forced entry. I even called out a soft hello, like some character in a bad movie. Nothing. Silence reclaimed the house. I sank back into the recliner, turning down the TV volume. I tried convincing myself it was nothing, maybe just the wind, or a door I'd accidentally left ajar. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I jumped up and opened the door, but still, nobody. I stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard. For a full minute I listened, hoping to catch a rustle, a crunch, any sign of movement. Nothing. The trees were a solid wall of shadow. Then, something caught my eye. On the porch railing next to the candy bowl lay a coin. It was old, smooth from wear, markings unrecognizable. I knew it hadn't been there earlier. I picked it up, cold, surprisingly heavy, and slipped it into my pocket. I closed and locked the door again, dragging the armchair in front of it as a barrier. Not that it would stop anything, but it made me feel less exposed. The dogs remained uneasy. Skip circled the coffee table, sniffing at invisible trails. Margot would sit briefly, then rise to the window and stare into the darkness, waiting for something unseen. Then, just before midnight, everything went out. Total darkness. TV, lights, porch light, all dead. No storm, no wind, just sudden, oppressive black. I froze. The darkness felt weighty, almost tangible. Then I heard it. A voice from the back of the house. Not loud, not frantic, just calm, steady, almost measured. I couldn't understand the words. It sounded like someone speaking deliberately, perhaps explaining something to another person. The dogs went still again. I edged toward the guest room hallway, crouching low near the rocking chair covered with a sheet. The voice seemed to emanate from there. I pressed my back to the wall and leaned closer, straining to hear. Still, the words made no sense. The rhythm of the speech didn't waver, emotionless, constant. I peeked into the room. Empty. The chair remained draped, the desk untouched. But the voice continued, growing slightly louder. It seemed to come from under the bed. Heart hammering, I backed away, hands trembling. I rushed to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer, trying to steady it with both hands. Then the doorbell rang again. Rapid, 3 times. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. The dogs erupted, barking furiously. I ran to the front window. The porch light had returned. On the railing near the candy bowl lay 3 more coins, identical to the first, worn and smooth. The candy remained untouched. Just past the driveway, between the trees, I caught a flicker of movement. Not an animal, not a person, just something shifting in the shadows. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pushed the armchair tight against it. The lights flickered once and stabilized. The voice stopped. The dogs settled into tense silence. I spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, knife in my lap, back against the wall. Every creak made me jump. Every whisper of air sounded intentional. By first light, I packed my things, grabbed my bag, and left without stopping. I didn't even shower. I drove straight into town, parked at the first gas station with a signal, and called my aunt. I told her I couldn't stay the week, offering some vague excuse about not feeling well. After I hung up, I stayed in the car a while, letting the early morning fog roll over the lot. The town was quiet, the streets empty, and the chill in the air felt sharper than usual. I kept thinking about the porch, the coins, and that voice. It made no sense. Nothing about it did. The dogs had been right. They had sensed something I couldn't see, something that had moved through the house unseen. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired, that it had been a mix of shadows, old floorboards, and too many horror movies. But every detail lingered. The way the coins had appeared, identical to the first. The porch light flickering just as I stepped outside. The voice coming from the empty guest room, calm and monotone, like it had been rehearsed. And the movement in the trees, faint but deliberate. Something was there. Something real. When I returned home later that day, the memory of the house made my skin crawl. I avoided the main path, keeping to the streets and well-lit areas, my heart still beating like a drum. I couldn't go back. The thought of returning for the remainder of the week made my stomach turn. Every image from the night replayed. The dogs alert, the open back door, the coins, the voice, the shadow in the distance. Each a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I called my aunt again when I reached a better signal.
I tried to downplay it, said it wasn't safe for me to stay, that I wasn't feeling well. She didn't push. I could hear the faint concern in her voice, but she trusted me enough not to question it. I didn't explain the coins, the voice, or the darkness. I couldn't. Even saying it aloud felt like it might make it real again.
Driving through the mountains, the early morning fog lifting, I thought about the dogs. Margot and Skip were probably still in the house, restless and alert, sensing something invisible, waiting for the rest of the night to pass. The idea that they had perceived it before I had gave me a chill. Animals always sense things humans can't. That night had been proof. I didn't stop until I reached the first town with a gas station and a proper signal. I parked, left the car running, and sat for a while just to collect myself. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. Every time I blinked, I could almost see the darkened shape of the trees surrounding that house, the faint glimmer of the coins on the railing, the back door swinging open on its own. Even weeks later, I couldn't bring myself to return. The thought of walking back up that hill, stepping onto the porch, and seeing that shadow again was enough to keep me away. I never told anyone exactly what had happened, not the details. Most people would call me paranoid, or imagine it as a mix of stress and old house quirks. But I knew what I'd seen, or at least what I had experienced. That night stayed with me long after the memory faded into the background. I could never explain the voice or the coins. The stillness of the woods, the sudden black of the power cut, the dog's unease. They all told me one thing. The house was not empty. Not really. Something had been there, watching, moving, and leaving evidence I could neither predict nor control. I still remember how heavy the silence felt, like it pressed down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe normally. Even the smallest sounds became terrifying. A floorboard creak, the subtle shifting of air through a slightly open vent, the faint rustle of leaves outside. Each moment stretched longer than it should have, each second a reminder that I was not alone. By the time dawn arrived, I had packed everything essential: clothes, phone, wallet, and left. The house, the porch, the coins, the dogs, the voice. I left it all behind. I drove straight into town and didn't stop until I reached a safe distance. I parked at the first gas station with a signal, called my aunt, and told her I couldn't finish the week. I gave her a vague excuse about not feeling well, and she accepted it without question. I didn't mention anything else. I couldn't. Even now, thinking about that night gives me goosebumps. The house, though picturesque and quiet by day, had an unmistakable presence, something unseen, deliberate, and patient. The memory of the coins, worn, heavy, cold, and the calm, emotionless voice echo in my mind like a warning I wasn't meant to ignore. I don't know if anyone else would believe me, or if I even want them to. It's enough that I know, that the dogs knew, that something was there, and that I left before it could get any closer. That Halloween in Draycott was supposed to be a quiet week of babysitting 2 dogs and enjoying the solitude. Instead, it became a night I will never forget. A night that reminded me that the woods can hide things that are very much awake, waiting, and watching. I haven't returned to that house since, and I doubt I ever will. Every time I drive past the outskirts of Draycott, my eyes drift to the hills, to the trees surrounding my aunt's home. And I feel that same chill, the reminder that some nights, some houses, and some creatures are better left alone. Just past the driveway, Between the trees, I caught a flicker of movement. Not an animal, not a person, just something shifting in the shadows. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pushed the armchair tight against it. The lights flickered once and stabilized. The voice stopped. The dog settled into tense silence. I spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, knife in my lap, back against the wall. Every creak made me jump. Every whisper of air sounded intentional. By first light, I packed my things, grabbed my bag, and left without stopping. I didn't even shower. I drove straight into town, parked at the first gas station with a signal, and called my aunt. I told her I couldn't stay the week, offering some vague excuse about not feeling well. My sister Leah asked me to stay at her place while she took the kids to visit Mark's family in Indiana. They had just moved into a new house just outside a tiny town called Kinley, somewhere deep in the Appalachian foothills I'd never even heard of. Leah left early on Halloween morning, kids bundled in the back seat, Mark already on the road ahead. She waved, reminded me that the freezer was stocked, Wi-Fi was spotty, and then drove off like she couldn't wait to leave the woods behind. I watched the taillights fade down the gravel road before shutting the door behind me. By the time the sun sank behind the ridge, I was alone in the house. I reheated some leftover lasagna Leah had left in the fridge and queued up a true crime podcast I'd been meaning to catch up on. Bad audio, worse stories, but comforting in a strange way. I curled up under a throw on their worn couch, trying not to dwell on the darkness outside, or the fact that the only light came from inside. I was halfway through my dinner, halfway through an episode about a man who faked his own disappearance, when I heard it. A knock. Not the doorbell, just a single, dull, flat tap. The kind of knock someone gives when they aren't sure they're at the right place. I paused the podcast, sat frozen for a few seconds, then rose. I crept to the front door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, and the motion light overhead hadn't triggered. Still, I opened the door, expecting maybe a squirrel, a branch blown down, anything that could make sense. But there, sitting at the edge of the doormat, was a small pumpkin. It definitely hadn't been there earlier. I stepped out, scanning the property. No cars, no voices, no wind, no movement. Just the still line of trees bordering the house. The pumpkin was strange. Its face wasn't your typical jack-o'-lantern grin with triangles for eyes. Instead, it had narrow vertical slits for eyes and a long, expressionless oval for a mouth, like an eerie blank emoji. I figured it was probably some prank by a local kid. Halloween in the middle of nowhere encourages creativity. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and locked the door. Returning to the couch, I tried to settle back in. About 10 minutes later, another knock sounded. 2 taps this time, quick. I sat upright and listened. Another 2 knocks followed in the same rhythm. I got up, walked to the door, and checked the peephole. Empty. When I opened the door, a second pumpkin had appeared on the porch. Same size, same unsettling face, placed exactly where the first had been. I didn't touch it. I just stared out into the dark, hoping to catch a shadow, a movement, maybe someone laughing. But there was nothing. No wind, no insects, no flicker from the motion light. Just that second pumpkin, and silence. I left it there and closed the door. Then, I noticed something alarming. The first pumpkin had changed. Its mouth, still technically oval, had stretched wider and longer,
as if someone had pulled the edges outward with invisible fingers. I hadn't moved it. Hard hammering, I stepped closer, leaned in, trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining it. To be sure, I snapped a photo with my phone. I went upstairs to use the bathroom and splashed some water on my face. Returning to the living room, I froze. The second pumpkin was inside the house, sitting right next to the first one on the kitchen table. My whole body locked up. I hadn't carried it in. I would have heard the door, seen someone moving. But the front door was still locked. Now the second pumpkin had changed too. It had 3 eye slits, stacked vertically like a totem pole, and no mouth at all. I didn't move or blink. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered once. When they returned, both pumpkins faced away from me. I grabbed my coat, phone, and keys without bothering to take a bag. I planned to drive into Kinley, find a motel, and come back in the morning. But as I opened the door, a third pumpkin appeared on the porch, smaller, child-sized. Panic surged. I kicked it hard off the steps. It tumbled into the grass. I ran to my car and tried to start it. Nothing. No rumble, no click. Silence, as if the battery wasn't connected. My phone showed no signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi. I tried calling Leah anyway, but the call dropped immediately. Windows fogging from my breath, heart racing. I realized there was nowhere to go. No neighbors, no help, no safe option. Eventually, I decided to barricade myself upstairs and wait for morning. Returning inside, the pumpkins were gone. Every single one. But on the kitchen floor, exactly where they had been, were 3 faint orange stains, like watercolor paint, each shaped like a sitting figure. I backed away slowly, eyes fixed on the shapes, then bolted upstairs. I locked the bedroom door, pushed the dresser against it, and sat on the floor with my phone in hand, useless as it was. Around 2 a.m., I started hearing footsteps. Soft, deliberate, moving from the living room to the kitchen and back again. They paused directly below me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Whoever or whatever was there seemed aware of me, just waiting. Eventually, the sounds faded. No retreating steps, just gone. I didn't sleep, sitting on the floor watching the dresser like a shield. Then the sun rose, spilling light through the blinds, and the house returned to silence. Summoning courage, I descended to check the kitchen. Everything was spotless. No pumpkins, no stains, nothing. The door remained locked. I got in the car and drove off without leaving a note, my heart still pounding. I didn't even pause to think about what had happened. I just drove. The gravel road stretched on, lined by trees that seemed to lean closer the further I went. My mind replayed every detail. The pumpkins appearing, their faces shifting, the stains on the floor, the footsteps upstairs. Nothing about it made sense. Nothing about it felt safe. Even with daylight coming, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow along the roadside seemed heavier than it should have been. Every bird call sounded deliberate. My stomach churned at the thought of returning to that house. Whatever had moved through it the night before was not human, not normal. And it had left proof I couldn't ignore. By the time I reached the first small town with signal,
I pulled into a gas station parking lot and let the engine idle. I needed to breathe, needed to tell someone that I hadn't imagined it. I called Leah. My voice shook as I explained that I couldn't finish house-sitting. I gave vague excuses, sick, uneasy, overwhelmed, but left out the details about the pumpkins, the stains, the footsteps. Even saying them aloud felt dangerous, as if it would somehow summon them back. Leah didn't press. She trusted me enough not to ask. I stayed in that town for the night, choosing a motel where I could see the road clearly and avoid anything lurking in the darkness. I slept fitfully, waking at odd intervals to check the parking lot, convinced that a pumpkin, or something far worse, might appear outside my door. But nothing did. The morning light felt like a shield. Weeks later, I still couldn't bring myself to return. The memory of the shifting pumpkin faces, the quiet but deliberate footsteps, and the stains in the kitchen left a lingering unease. I told myself it was a combination of Halloween pranks, imagination, and an overactive mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something had moved through that house while I was alone, something deliberate, and it had made its presence known in ways I couldn't explain. Even now, I picture those pumpkins, small, unassuming, yet filled with a presence that defied logic. Their shifting faces, the way they multiplied, the silent warning they carried. It's a memory that refuses to fade. And the stains left behind, perfectly shaped and impossible to wash away, remind me that whatever was there, it wasn't just a trick or a joke. I haven't gone back to that house. I haven't even driven past it. I still wonder if Leah and the kids noticed anything, or if it only targeted me while I was alone. Some nights, when the wind carries the faint scent of autumn leaves, I swear I can feel its gaze, waiting in the shadows, patient and silent. That Halloween night in Kinley was meant to be simple. A quiet evening alone in a small house, just me and a few comforts. Instead, it became a night I will never forget. A night that reminded me some things, no matter how small or ordinary they appear, are far from harmless. Some doors should never open. Some pumpkins should never be brought inside. And some nights in the Appalachians are best left alone. I locked the bedroom door, pushed the dresser against it, and sat on the floor with my phone in hand, useless as it was. Around 2 a.m. I started hearing footsteps. Soft, deliberate, moving from the living room to the kitchen and back again. They paused directly below me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Whoever, or whatever was there seemed aware of me, just waiting. Eventually the sounds faded. No retreating steps, just gone. I didn't sleep, sitting on the floor watching the dresser like a shield. Then the sun rose, spilling light through the blinds, and the house returned to silence. Summoning courage, I descended to check the kitchen. Everything was spotless. No pumpkins, no stains, nothing. The door remained locked. I got in the car and drove off without leaving a note, my heart still pounding. That year, Halloween landed on a Tuesday, and by twilight, the little town parade in Langdon had packed up and disappeared into memory. I lived just a little outside of town, down a narrow, twisting hill road that turns to gravel before reaching my driveway. My home is a split level perched at the edge of dense woods, and the closest neighbor is probably half a mile away. We hardly ever cross paths, and the cell signal vanishes well before the gravel driveway even begins. Honestly, that's exactly how I like it. Peaceful. Isolated.
No unexpected visitors unless they truly mean to come. That evening, I placed a small bowl of mini Snickers on the front steps, a quiet nod to tradition. I wasn't expecting anyone. Trick-or-treaters don't travel this far out. The hills are steep, the roads too dark, and most families stick to Langdon's lit-up Main Street where everyone knows one another. I stayed inside, making a comforting dinner of roasted acorn squash drizzled with olive oil and sprinkled with cracked black pepper. I poured a cup of warm cider with a touch of bourbon, savoring one of those rare evenings when everything feels settled, quiet, and just right. I turned on The Fog, a film I've watched so many times I could quote half the lines, and curled up under a blanket on the couch, the fire crackling in the hearth. Around 10 o'clock, I let the wood stove burn down, cleaned my plate, and followed the familiar nightly routine. Brushed my teeth, switched off the lights, locked doors. Nothing seemed out of place. Until I heard it. 3 knocks. Not the screen door, which rattles easily in the wind. These were heavier, deliberate, striking the main door itself. Dull, flat, close. I froze, toothbrush still in hand, listening intently. No voices outside, no footsteps crunching the gravel, no distant car engines humming. I flicked off the bathroom light and stepped cautiously into the hallway. Then again, 3 more knocks. Slower, deliberate, each spaced apart like whoever it was wanted me to notice the gap between them. I didn't rush to the door. I paused, trying to gauge what I was dealing with. Trick-or-treaters wouldn't be wandering here this late, and no headlights cut through the darkness outside. No motion sensors triggered, only the knock. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I hesitated, then unlatched it, opening just a few inches. The porch was empty, the candy bowl untouched. No wrappers scattered on the concrete, no footprints leading anywhere. I closed the door, locked it, and lingered for a moment, hands still resting on the knob. Next, I moved to the back door. I walked through the kitchen, flicked on the small overhead light above the sink, and checked the handle. Locked. I tapped the windows one by one, almost unnecessarily, but couldn't shake the sound of the knocks echoing in my head. They hadn't been frantic or violent, just deliberate, confident. Whoever was out there knew I would hear, knew I would respond. I opened the junk drawer, grabbed the flashlight, and slipped on my boots. Slowly, I circled the house. No footprints, no snapped branches, nothing but a few leaves rustling in the trees. The gravel driveway remained untouched. Nothing suggested anyone had approached. Back inside, I double-checked the front and back locks. Sat on the couch with the TV still playing, but couldn't focus. Every tiny noise was amplified. The ice maker clicking, the pipes groaning. I muted the television. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps. Upstairs. Soft, uneven, like someone shifting weight between the boards. I froze, staring at the staircase from the living room, hand hovering over the flashlight. I live alone, important to note. No roommates, no pets. I hadn't set foot upstairs since Saturday. I stayed as silent as possible. The 4 stair treads creak in the same way every time. It was no different that night. At the top, I froze again, pulse loud in my ears. From the guest room came a faint shuffle, a dragging sound, almost like fabric brushing against the floor. I walked slowly toward it. The door was already open. Inside, nothing. The bed untouched,
the blanket smooth. Window latched, closet doors as I left them. I checked the office. Everything the same. Desk untouched, chair pushed in, drawers closed. I lingered upstairs, listening, then eventually returned downstairs. That's when I noticed the candy bowl. It had shifted. Not much, maybe an inch. But I remembered lining it up precisely along the seam between two tiles. Now it was off-center. Then my eyes caught the back door. It was wide open, the curtain swaying gently. I gripped the flashlight tightly and approached. The latch wasn't broken, nothing forced, just unlocked, as if someone had opened it from inside. I checked under the porch, the crawl space, and even the attic hatch, which I hadn't touched since moving in. All clear. I grabbed a hammer from the shed, turned on every light in the house, and returned to the couch. Flashlight on my lap. I wasn't going to sleep, but pacing was useless. Just as my adrenaline began to fade, a third knock came. From behind me this time, the window behind the couch. That window faces a blank wall, no ledge, no tree, no roof, just flat siding extending 2 stories. The knock landed harder, sharp, clean. The glass didn't rattle, crack, or smudge. I turned slowly. The window was immaculate. No fingerprints, no marks. And then the TV, muted, surged to life on full volume. Static screeched. I hadn't touched the remote. I unplugged it and refused to approach. I didn't sleep in the house that night. All doors and windows were locked. I grabbed a blanket and pillow and slept in the cab of my truck. Windows up, doors locked, waiting for sunrise. I stayed in the truck until the first hints of light began to creep over the horizon. Dawn stretched slowly across the hills, washing the world in pale gray. Only then did I feel safe enough to leave the cab. The house sat behind me, quiet and empty, its dark windows staring like eyes that hadn't blinked all night. My boots crunched over the gravel as I approached the front steps. The candy bowl was exactly where I had left it, perfectly centered this time, no sign of disturbance. Inside, everything seemed normal. No footprints, no open doors, no signs of a presence. I ran through the house methodically, checking every room, every corner. The guest room was untouched. The office still neat. Even the attic hatch, which had been secure, showed no sign of tampering. I couldn't explain what had happened, and that thought alone made my stomach twist. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, trying to force my mind to rationalize the night's events. Maybe it had been an animal? Impossible. The knocks, the upstairs footsteps, the moving candy bowl. No wildlife could have orchestrated that. Maybe my imagination, fueled by too many horror films and too much isolation? Perhaps. But the fear that had clutched me all night was real, and the empty house didn't feel any safer in daylight. After a while, I ventured outside, scanning the yard and the surrounding trees. The gravel drive remained undisturbed. No broken branches, no footprints, nothing to suggest anyone had approached. And yet, the sense of intrusion lingered, heavy and tangible. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to breathe normally. I decided I couldn't stay another night, not after what had happened. I packed a small bag, loaded essentials into my truck, and did one last sweep of the house. Every lock engaged, every light off, every window secured. I didn't leave a note, didn't bother with explanations. I simply drove. The winding road out of the woods felt endless, each curve reminding me of the isolation I had tried to enjoy only hours earlier. As I reached the edge of town, the familiar glow of streetlights and distant houses felt almost comforting. People moved about normally, oblivious to the night I had endured. I pulled into a small motel, paid for a room, and collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the building, every distant car engine, set my nerves jangling. Sleep came in fits, restless and shallow, haunted by imagined knocks and soft footsteps echoing on wooden floors. By morning, I forced myself to return to the house. Daylight brought clarity, and yet a small part of me dreaded what I might find. Everything appeared undisturbed. Doors locked, windows intact, candy bowl where it belonged. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of another presence. It was as if the night's events had been some elaborate hallucination. Still, I couldn't ignore the memory of the knocks, the shifting bowl, and the footsteps above. That fear, that sense of violation, had settled in permanently. In the days that followed, I took extra precautions. New locks, a security camera, even a motion sensor light along the driveway. I told no one about the incident. People would have laughed it off, chalked it up to an overactive imagination or stress. But I knew what I had experienced. The feeling of someone or something watching, entering, and moving within my home was not something easily dismissed. Halloween became a marker in my memory. A night when solitude turned into suspense and silence carried a threat I couldn't explain. I never left candy on the porch after that. Never turned the lights low. Never felt completely safe in the house alone again. Every knock, every creak, every shadow reminded me that some presence might be closer than I realized, waiting just beyond sight. Even now, years later, I drive past the winding gravel road and glance toward the house, half expecting to see a figure at the window, a shadow shifting in the trees, or a faint movement where nothing should be. I don't stop. I don't linger. And I certainly don't go up that hill after dark. The events of that Halloween night became a quiet warning. Isolation can be comforting, but in the wrong circumstances, it can also be dangerous. The woods are patient. They wait. And if you're not careful, they remind you, through sound, movement, and silence, that you are never as alone as you think. The window behind the couch. That window faces a blank wall. No ledge, no tree, no roof. Just flat siding extending 2 stories. The knock landed harder, sharp, clean. The glass didn't rattle, crack, or smudge. I turned slowly. The window was immaculate. No fingerprints, no marks. And then the TV, muted, surged to life on full volume. Static screeched. I hadn't touched the remote. I unplugged it and refused to approach. I didn't sleep in the house that night. All doors and windows were locked. I grabbed a blanket and pillow and slept in the cab of my truck. Windows up, doors locked, waiting for sunrise. That Halloween fell on a Friday, which might have made it a big deal in most places, but around our neighborhood, it never really was. Jeremy and I were technically too old to be trick-or-treating. He was 15. I had just turned 16 that August. You know the age. It's past the cutoff for fun, but not quite adulthood yet. Still, we figured why not? One last night of doing it. We threw on slapdash costumes. He grabbed an old pirate mask that had lost its elastic, and I smeared leftover red face paint across my eyes, claiming I was a zombie wrestler. No one questioned it. We left the house just after dinner. The sky had already darkened, and the sounds of younger kids drifted down the streets. High-pitched squeals,
tiny footsteps dragging plastic pumpkins along sidewalks, parents trailing with flashlights and thermoses of hot drinks. Sand Hollow looked exactly as it always did. Tidy porches lit with string lights, plastic skeletons slouched in lawn chairs, an inflatable ghost swaying in the wind here and there. Every house had something set up, and everyone knew everyone. Trick-or-treating meant running into some aunt, an old babysitter, or a neighbor you had grown up with. We started with the Brightons, who handed us full-size Snickers bars, then the Glens, this year handing out some old-fashioned bottled sodas. We were halfway through Miss Laney telling her story about her cat dressed as a pumpkin when Jeremy nudged me with his elbow, pointing down the street, toward the Martin house. At first, it was hard to make out details, but there was definitely a porch light on. That was strange. That house had been empty for years. It had once belonged to Mr. Martin, a quiet, hunched man who wore the same gray cardigan daily. He'd passed away 2 Halloweens ago, and no one had touched the property since. Windows had been boarded up, the mailbox jammed with junk, the porch sagging like a warped seesaw. Yet, that night, the orange porch light was glowing and a candy bowl was set out, barely visible from the sidewalk. Jeremy slowed, frowning. "You think someone moved in?" I shook my head. Unlikely. Maybe a family member putting out candy or something. Neither of us were convinced, but we both knew no one had lived there since the fire. Smoke stains still streaked the second-floor windows, yet here was a bowl of candy on a working porch light. We approached the front steps slowly, half expecting the wood to give way. It creaked and groaned, but held. The candy sat there neatly. Full-size Kit Kats, Reese's, the good stuff. No torn wrappers, no weather damage, just fresh. My hand hovered over the candy when the front door began to open. No slam, no bang, just a slow, deliberate creak, as if someone inside had been waiting and now, finally, decided we were close enough. The door swung inward, revealing only a long, dark hallway. No one was there. I froze, fingers still hovering. Jeremy laughed nervously, that high, forced laugh that gives itself away. "Okay, that's creepy." We waited, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the black emptiness where the door had been. He called, "Hello?" Still nothing. Then came a sound from inside. Not words, not even a voice. It was more like a whispering shift, air moving through narrow gaps, flicking from side to side, as though the walls themselves were breathing. I should have stepped back immediately, but Jeremy's posture, trying too hard to seem brave, made me stay. I didn't want to chicken out. "Probably just a Halloween prop," I whispered. "Motion activated." Jeremy squinted. "Where's the speaker?" Good question. We stepped past the threshold into the entryway. The air hit me, icy. Not the crisp autumn kind, but freezer-level cold. Skin prickled, throat dry, as if I had swallowed dust. There was nothing inside. No furniture, no curtains. Just bare wooden floors stretching down a hallway that seemed impossibly long. Then it struck me. The layout was wrong. I had been inside years ago. There used to be a small entry with a coat rack, and a right turn led into a living room with brown carpet and a dusty armchair. Now it was just a straight corridor, distorted, like someone had stretched a normal floor plan unnaturally. Candy wrappers were scattered along the floor, not in a pile but dropped one by one, like someone had walked through letting them fall behind them. The candy bowl outside remained full, untouched. My stomach twisted. Jeremy leaned close. "I think someone's in here." I opened my mouth to respond, but then a faint yellow light flickered at the far end of the hallway. Almost greenish, like a dying bulb hanging from a cord. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging, barefoot. The kind of sound that makes you imagine wet soles smeared with dirt. We bolted straight out the door, down the porch steps, back onto the street. Silence followed us. We didn't speak. We didn't look back until reaching the corner. And when we did, the house seemed normal again. Door closed, porch light steady, candy bowl still untouched. But in the front window we saw a figure. No face visible, just a dark silhouette standing perfectly still, framed by light swaying slowly like it hung from a cord. No wind, no movement besides that back and forth rhythm. My chest tightened. We turned and walked on, silent, until the main road, then ran the rest of the way to Jeremy's house. That night I told my mom. I expected her to dismiss it, chalk it up to imagination or someone playing a prank. But she didn't. That house has been empty since the fire. No one's supposed to be in there. The memory stuck. The next afternoon we rode past it on bikes. In daylight it looked even worse. Porch empty, boards back in place, nailed tight. A city notice was stapled to the front door. Condemned, unsafe for entry. No candy, no figure. Just a dead house as always. We didn't speak about it after that. Occasionally, Jeremy would joke, "Want to hit the Martin place this year?" I would pretend to laugh, but it never felt funny. 2 years later, a kid from his school went missing on Halloween. An 8th grader, trick-or-treating with friends, split off for one last house before curfew. Only his costume and pillowcase were found, dropped in front of the Martin house. The door was open. The candy bowl returned to the porch. I haven't gone trick-or-treating since. After that night, Halloween never felt the same again. Even passing by Sand Hollow, the cheerful decorations and laughing kids couldn't erase the image of that Martin house. The way it had suddenly shifted from abandoned ruin to an eerie stage, the hallway stretching impossibly long, the cold that wasn't autumn air. It haunted me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to push it from my mind, but small reminders kept creeping in. Shadows that lingered too long. Unexplained creaks in old floorboards. Drafts that seemed to move against the wind. I'd catch myself glancing toward empty hallways, imagining that same dark figure. Jeremy and I didn't talk about it much, but whenever we did, it was under hushed tones, a cautious curiosity. When the next Halloween rolled around, the memory of that Friday haunted me more than ever. Jeremy joked about going back, checking to see if the Martin house had returned to its usual state, but I couldn't. The thought of walking up to that porch, hearing that slow drag of footsteps, seeing the faint glow of the unseen presence, made my skin crawl. I stayed home instead, lights on, doors locked, and windows covered. The town carried on like nothing had happened. Children in costumes ran up and down the main streets, parents snapping pictures, neighbors comparing decorations. Life continued, bright and oblivious to the darkness tucked into the abandoned house at the edge of town. And yet, every time I passed by it in daylight, I would glance up, half expecting to see that silhouette again. But nothing. Boards nailed tight, windows barred, the warning sign stark against the weathered wood. Years passed.
Halloween became less about candy and costumes and more about memory and caution. The Martin house was slowly swallowed by weeds and shadows. I never went back, not even to peek from the street. Yet the story of that night followed me, whispers in my mind whenever the calendar flipped to October. The way the hallway didn't look like it should exist. The way the air had cut through me like ice. And the faint swinging light with its silent figure. It was a memory etched deeper than fear. It was disbelief. Impossibility made real. 2 years after that first experience, the town faced a tragedy. A young boy from Jeremy's school vanished on Halloween night. Friends reported splitting up for just one last house, but he never returned. When searchers reached the Martin house, they found his pillowcase and costume on the front sidewalk. The porch was empty, the door ajar, the candy bowl once again perched neatly. It mirrored that night Jeremy and I had encountered. No sign of the boy, no evidence of anyone inside. Just the house, waiting. Since then, I haven't celebrated Halloween in any conventional way. The thought of stepping onto a porch, knocking, or reaching for a candy bowl sends my pulse racing. The memory of the hallway, impossibly stretched. The cold that seemed to drain the warmth from my bones. And the quiet, deliberate sounds of someone, or something, inside, have stayed with me. It's a lesson in caution. Some houses are meant to be left alone. Some doors never opened. Some shadows never followed. Even now, when I drive past Sand Hollow, I glance at the Martin house. Empty, boarded, condemned. Yet the weight of that night lingers. The echo of footsteps that never truly vanished. The flickering glow that existed just long enough to convince me the impossible was real. Every Halloween, I remember the last bowl of Kit Kats hovering between my fingers. The unbroken silence that screamed louder than any shout. And the figure, standing perfectly still in the window, framed by swinging light. It's a memory I can't unsee. Halloween, for me, is no longer candy, costumes, or fun. It's a reminder of how the ordinary can twist into something beyond comprehension. How a familiar house can transform into a place that defies space and logic. How curiosity can be far more dangerous than fear. And the Martin house, forever in my mind, stands as proof that some mysteries, some horrors, are best left undisturbed. I never went trick-or-treating again after that night, and I don't plan to. Every time I think about it, the image of that long, dark corridor, the cold, the scattered candy wrappers, and that figure in the window returns. It's a memory that refuses to fade. And though the house now sits silent, condemned and forgotten by everyone else, I know it's waiting, somewhere behind those boarded windows, for the next unwary soul to approach. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, which felt like a small gift from the universe. A whole weekend to wear costumes, eat too much sugar, and maybe sneak in a scary movie or two if you could get your parents to look the other way. Only about 10 or 11 houses along the ridge actually handed out candy, but it had become a ritual for the local kids. Lane had planned to go with me. We'd spent weeks coordinating our zombie outfits, maybe trying to spook the younger children just a little. Nothing cruel, just playful. But earlier that day, he'd gotten into it with his mom over some backtalk and a report card he hadn't turned in yet. And she shut him down immediately. I considered staying home. Going by myself felt kind of lame, but I'd already put the costume together.
I didn't want to waste the one night a year when it was acceptable to be a little strange. By a little after 6, I was out the door. The sun was low in the sky but hadn't vanished yet. I shoved a flashlight into my hoodie pocket and grabbed a pillowcase for candy. My outfit was thrown together yet had its own creepy charm. Black hoodie, a dollar store skull mask, and those glow-in-the-dark skeleton gloves I'd found in the back of a drawer. First stop was Mrs. Grayley's house. She always handed out tiny bags of pretzels and greeted every kid with a cheerful, "Here you go, sugar." Then came the Macklins, who went all out each year with full-size candy bars, nestled among fake spiders and fake cobwebs. I noticed a few other kids heading the opposite way, though I didn't know any of them. I waved and kept moving. By the time I reached the stretch near the quarry, night had fully fallen. My flashlight beam cut across loose gravel and overgrown brush. The trees on either side felt unnaturally close, almost leaning in. I hummed to myself to fill the silence, keeping the creeping feeling at bay. Then I saw it. The old hollow house. Everyone knew it existed, though few spoke about it. It stood at the far edge of the loop, just where the road curved near a steep drop along the quarry. Empty for as long as I could remember. No lights, no movement, just a slanted tin roof and siding the color of dry bones. One porch column had collapsed. The steps seemed ready to give way under the gentlest pressure. I had passed it many times, always on the far side of the street, never looking too closely. Nobody lingered there. That night, though, it was different. A single jack-o'-lantern perched on the porch. Its flickering light danced low and uneven. The grin was wide and crooked, teeth carved jagged, like someone had hacked at it with a dull knife. The eyes were triangular, but cut harshly across the middle. It didn't feel like the playful, store-bought kind of scary. It was careless, almost cruel. And it hadn't been there before. Lane and I had walked this path just 2 days earlier, and the porch had been empty. I stopped at the gate, leaning heavily to one side on rusted hinges. The scene felt deliberately staged, like someone wanted it seen, but hadn't tried to hide the intent. No other decorations, no fake cobwebs, no orange string lights, no music. Just that one dimly glowing pumpkin. I told myself someone had moved in, trying to make the place look inhabited. It wasn't impossible. People did stranger things for cheap property. I pushed the gate open and flinched at the loud metallic squeal. The porch groaned under my weight as I climbed the steps. They held, but flexed beneath me like they were warning me. I rapped on the front door. Nothing. Silence except for wind in the trees and my own breath rattling behind the skull mask. I knocked again. Still nothing. I was about to turn away when the door shifted open on its own. Not fully, just halfway. It moved slowly, as if someone inside had nudged it and allowed it to swing gently. I paused, straining for any sound. Then I noticed the candle. Positioned on the floor just inside, next to a cheap plastic Halloween bowl filled with candy. Peanut butter cups, lollipops, Smarties. A small folded piece of paper leaned against it. In sharp all-cap letters it read, "Take one." I hesitated, unsure if this was a prank. The room beyond the doorway was empty. No furniture, no movement. Just a damp, musty odor wafting out. I stepped forward just enough to reach the bowl. The floor creaked sharply, like something below was shifting its weight. My hand hovered above the candy. I grabbed a single lollipop and turned to leave. The door slammed behind me with a deafening thud. I jumped, dropping the lollipop, and spun to twist the doorknob. Nothing. It didn't budge. Not locked, not stuck,
just uncooperative. I pulled harder, still nothing. The candle went out, pitch black. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on. Its beam sliced through the dusty, derelict interior. Torn wallpaper, boarded windows, debris from years of neglect. And then I saw it. Another faint, flickering orange glow deeper inside. My gut screamed to turn back, but some impulse made me follow.
The glow led me to the kitchen. Cracked tile, ceiling bowed from water damage. On the counter, a second candle beside a second candy bowl. Another note. Good. Take one more. This candy was different. Foil-wrapped chocolate eyeballs, striped peppermints, oddly shaped taffy wrapped in wax. I didn't touch it. I just stared, frozen. Then I heard it. Footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate. Not pacing, just one step after another, each board groaning under weight. Silence. Then a thud. Something heavy hitting the floor upstairs. My mouth went dry. I edged toward the kitchen door, then bolted for the front room, checking the windows. Every one was nailed shut, old nails embedded deep. Pressing my hands to the glass did nothing. When I turned, the first candle and candy bowl had vanished. Not just moved, gone. The entryway was empty. Only the kitchen held any light. And then the steps began again. This time on the stairs. I ran, no plan, just sprinting back toward the kitchen, searching for a back exit. There wasn't one. Only the pantry remained open. I crawled inside, closing the door behind me, crouching between broken shelves and scattered mouse droppings. My flashlight flickered once and steadied. I turned it off entirely. Silence enveloped me. Then I heard soft, dragging footsteps outside the pantry. Bare feet. They stopped just beyond the door. Then, 3 quiet taps. Polite. Deliberate. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. A folded note appeared on the floor inside the pantry. It hadn't been there before. It read, "You took one. You took one more. Now, one must stay." I kicked the pantry door open, flashlight ready. The room was empty. The front door stood wide open. I didn't hesitate. I bolted, running without pause, lungs burning, until I reached the gravel at the edge of our driveway. When my parents asked why I returned so early, I said a dog had spooked me near the quarry. They didn't ask more. The next morning, I convinced Lane to come with me. Just to see. Just to prove I hadn't imagined it. In daylight, the old hollow house looked even worse. Porch caved in, roof sagging, vines creeping over the siding. No jack-o'-lantern, no notes, no sign of life for decades. But on the porch steps was my plastic skull mask. I didn't touch it, didn't say a word. Lane and I turned silently and walked home, the memory heavy and quiet between us. The town I relocated to was called Mayfield Hollow, a tiny, tucked-away settlement on the edge of the Appalachian foothills. I rented the upper floor of an old split-level farmhouse at the very end of Willow Run Road. The place had seen better days, but the rent was cheap, and I didn't need much room. Below me lived the Crawfords, Lyall and Fern. Probably in their 60s, maybe older. They always dressed like they were headed to some subdued, casual funeral.
Lyle in buttoned cardigans and slacks, Fern in floral dresses with crisp collars. Their hair never looked messy, their speech never faltered. Every time I passed them on the stairs or in the driveway, their smiles lingered just a fraction too long. Polite. Creepy, but polite. Honestly, I was grateful for quiet neighbors who didn't throw loud parties or blast music. You'd think that would have been the end of it. But then things started to feel strange. It began with their porch. Around the second week of October, they put up their Halloween decorations, if you could even call them that. No pumpkins. Instead, long, narrow gourds with tiny slits for eyes. No mouths, no candles. Just these eerie, blank shapes. Always 7 of them. Every year, Lyle would align them perfectly along the porch railing, facing the road, like they were watching for something. One night I was up late working, freelance hours all over the place, and I heard a sound from below. At first I thought maybe furniture was being dragged, a slow scraping across wood. But it kept happening, always after midnight, sometimes closer to 3. Same pattern every time, that slow, deliberate slide, then silence. Then again, never rushed. Always just slow enough to feel intentional. One morning, I knocked on their door to ask if they were moving things around at night. Lyle answered, smiling like always. Things shift on their own, he said. Houses breathe at night. It came out like a line from a book, rehearsed, as if he had been waiting for the question. I laughed politely and left it alone, but it stuck in my mind. That phrase, it felt wrong. Halloween arrived. I wasn't expecting much. Mayfield Hollow didn't do much in the way of costumes or trick-or-treating. Still, I picked up a bag of candy out of habit. 8 o'clock came and went. No knocks. Then at 9, just as I was thinking of turning in for the night, it happened. A knock at the door. I got up and opened it. No one was there. Just a single gourd sitting on the welcome mat. The same type as those on the Crawford porch, but different. This one had a long, jagged slit down its side, as if torn rather than carved. And it smelled awful, like meat left out too long, wet and sour. I picked it up by the stem, carried it behind the shed, and tossed it into the trash bin. Wiped my hands on my jeans. Didn't think too much of it at the time. Probably a dumb prank. An hour later, another knock. Slower this time. 3 deliberate knocks. I went to the door, didn't open it, just peered through the peephole. Nothing. 5 minutes later, 3 more knocks, sharper this time, like knuckles against solid wood. I turned off all the lights, closed the curtains, and sat in the dark with my phone, screen dimmed. The living room window looks out onto the porch, so I peeked through a gap in the blinds. No one was there, but something felt off. The porch railing cast long, spindly shadows, except one shadow didn't make sense. Taller than the others, too vertical, unnervingly still, like someone was standing just out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. The knocks came intermittently until just after 4 in the morning, then stopped. When daylight came, I went to the trash bin behind the shed. The gourd was gone. I tried to tell myself an animal dragged it off, but nothing else in the bin had been disturbed. Just the gourd. Not a piece left behind. Later that morning, I knocked on the Crawfords' door again. This time, Fern answered. Her eyes didn't meet mine, stayed just over my shoulder, as if she were watching something behind me. I asked cautiously if they had left something on my porch. She said, quietly, "Be careful what you throw away. The house doesn't like waste." Then she closed the door without another word. That was the first night I couldn't sleep in my bedroom. I kept hearing things beneath the floor. Not the slow dragging anymore, something lighter, quicker, like footsteps pacing. At one point, lying awake, I felt the floorboards under my bed shift slightly, like something had passed beneath me. That night I dragged my mattress into the kitchen and stayed there until sunrise. The next day, I called the property manager, asking if anyone had ever reported strange behavior from the tenants below. A long pause followed. "You mean the Crawfords?" she asked. I nodded. She hesitated. "There haven't been tenants in that unit for about 2 years. I froze. I'd been hearing them, seeing them, or so I thought. I live above them. That's not possible. The last people who stayed had moved out after complaints. She trailed off. "Never mind. I'll swing by next week and take a look." I didn't wait. I walked outside and stared at their porch. 7 gourds, exactly as before. One of them now had a fresh slit down the center. Their front door was locked. No answer to my knocks. That night I heard something different, not below me but above. Pacing, deliberate footsteps in the attic. I didn't go up there, stayed in the kitchen again, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, every light on. By the time the sun rose, it was November 1st. The porch was empty. No gourds. Their car was gone. Windows tightly shut. No movement inside. Around the side of the house, hidden under a crawl of ivy, I noticed something I hadn't before. A basement door. Old wood swollen from rain. Rusted padlock. I called the sheriff, explained the strange noises, worried that something illegal might be happening. A deputy arrived later that afternoon. Man in his 50s, quiet. When I mentioned the Crawfords, he gave me a tight look. "They're still there," he said. I nodded. He asked to inspect the place, walked through my floor slowly, tapping boards with his knuckles, but found nothing. I moved out the next morning, before sunrise. I'm 28 now, and I still can't hear the word Halloween without my mind snapping back to that weekend in Moon Ridge. My cousin Brad was one of those people who always had a plan, usually the kind that started with, "Trust me, it'll be fun." That's what he said when he invited me to a Halloween party up in the Appalachian Hills, in some tiny, almost ghost town-like place I'd never even heard of, Moon Ridge. Looking back, that should have been my first warning. He promised bonfires, live music, and a mix of his old college friends camping out in the woods. I'd been working non-stop for months, and the idea of a weekend full of beer, bad decisions, and aimless laughter felt like the perfect reset. The drive there was long and winding, the kind of mountain road where the GPS gives up halfway, and you just keep hoping you're still heading the right direction. My signal dropped about 20 minutes before I finally saw the distant glow of cabin lights, nestled like a scattering of fireflies through the trees. There were maybe 20 or 30 people already gathered when I arrived. Music thumped faintly through the air, bouncing off the surrounding trees, mingling with the sharp tang of smoke and the sweet aroma of spiced cider. At first, it felt familiar, like every late-night college bonfire I'd ever been to. But something about it was off. Not frightening exactly, just disorganized, like no one had truly taken charge. They'd set up in a clearing behind an old hunting cabin, half the crowd in tents, half planning to sleep in cars parked along the perimeter. The surrounding trees were strung with glow sticks, cheap orange bulbs, and the occasional flickering candle. Jack-o'-lanterns had been carved in bizarre, haphazard ways, some grinning cheerfully, some frozen in neutral expressions, and one completely mouthless. A large black cauldron over the fire emitted a smell like cider boiled with every type of liquor imaginable. I recognized a handful of faces from college, but most were locals, friends of friends, and a few who looked like they had wandered in from nowhere.
Everyone seemed friendly, although the costumes were haphazard. A wolf mask here, a burlap sack scarecrow there, and plenty of people dressed normally, in jackets and jeans. The mixture made it difficult to tell who belonged and who didn't. As the night deepened, the music grew louder, the fire burned lower, and conversations began looping in that drunken, circular way where everyone says the same story a dozen times. Around midnight, Brad's friend Lena, tall, sharp-eyed, and brimming with confidence, announced she wanted to show us something cool. She said there was an old ghost path nearby, a trail locals claimed would vanish if you ventured too far after midnight. I assumed she was joking, but a few of us, drunk enough to be daring, agreed to follow her. Me, Brad, Lena, and two guys whose names I never learned. The trail started behind the cabin and quickly disappeared into dense woods. Not wide, just a narrow dirt path, the kind barely worn through years of occasional foot traffic. The deeper we went, the quieter the world became. Even the faint music from the party seemed to fade until all we could hear was the crunch of our boots and the low hum of the forest at night. Lena's flashlight swung ahead, bobbing like a small, nervous creature through the shadows. About 10 minutes into the woods, we saw the first mask. It hung from a low branch, carved roughly from wood the size of a human face. The features were crude. Gouged eyes, a thin slit for a mouth, no paint, no color. The sort of thing someone might whittle in boredom if they'd been living out here for years. I assumed it was a joke, something left over from last year's party. But Lena stopped suddenly. "That wasn't here last year," she whispered. A few steps further, another mask appeared, and then another. As we pressed on, they became stranger, almost grotesque. Longer noses, exaggerated mouths, one painted red around the eyes, one with tiny deer antlers affixed to the top, and one with what appeared to be real hair nailed in. The masks seemed to grow more elaborate with every step, as if the forest itself was escalating the strangeness around us. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died completely. We were left in near darkness. Moonlight just barely lit our faces, but the woods felt heavier now, like the air had thickened and pressed down on us. Rad tried to break the silence, laughing a little too loudly. "Okay, that's enough. You win, Lena. Creepy as hell." But Lena didn't respond. She was staring past me, expression blank. And that's when I saw it. A figure crouched beside a tree, half hidden in the brush. At first, I thought it was someone from the party wearing one of the masks. It wore a tattered flannel, sleeves ripped, head bent low. I tried to joke, "Hey, you're really committing to the bit, huh?" Silence. Then it moved. Too fast, rising to its full height and starting toward us. Not running, just walking. Straight line, steady pace, arms dangling, movements unnervingly smooth, unnatural, as though it didn't need to think about each step. Brad muttered under his breath. We all froze. No one said run, but instinctively, we did. We bolted through the trees, the forest a blur. I tripped down a slope, slammed my shoulder into a jagged rock, rolled through wet leaves, and when I stumbled upright, everyone was gone. No footsteps, no rustling, just the wind weaving through the tall trunks. I called for Brad, then Lena. Silence. Panic set in. I spun in a slow circle, trying to remember which way we'd come. But the masks were gone. The trail had vanished. The trees all looked the same, too tall, too close, shadows stretching long and ominous. My shoulder throbbed, Every shadow seemed like a figure frozen in place. I picked a direction at random, moving carefully, hoping to stumble back into the clearing. 2 hours later, I finally emerged. The party was still there. Same music, same fire. No one seemed to notice I'd been gone. Mud covered my shoes, my sleeve was ripped, a small trickle of blood on my hand. When I asked about Brad and Lena, people shrugged. One guy suggested they'd gone into town for more beer. I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my car, doors locked, staring at the cabin, waiting for someone to reappear. Nobody came. The next morning, a few partygoers offered to help retrace the path. In daylight, it was easy enough to find. But there were no masks. Not a single one. The trail stretched straight for a while, then abruptly ended at a barbed wire fence. Beyond it, nothing but thick brush and empty, open space. Even now, thinking back, I remember the suffocating quiet of those woods, the way the masks seemed to emerge from the shadows themselves, and the impossible disappearance of both my friends and the trail. Moonridge wasn't just a party in the mountains. It was a place that felt alive in a way that wasn't meant for humans. A pocket of reality that didn't play by the rules of the world I knew.